Crystal Ball College Football. I'm your host, Grayson Grunhafer, and today we got to talk about this purple team up in Manhattan who just had the best performance of the weekend, or at least a top 2 performance. There's one other one. I know the people in Knoxville will get mad at me if I don't also mention Tennessee in there, but what Kansas State did against a top 10 Oklahoma State team was just fantastic. With a backup quarterback, a lot of anticipation, a lot riding on this game as well, as Kansas State basically needed this game to cement themselves as a favorite to make it to a Big 12 title game. I also think it's really important for K-State because, Chris Kleiman at Kansas State's really felt like, 8-4. 8-4, 8-4, 8-4. It's like this trend, right, of this is kind of who we are. This is what we're going to be. I know, there's been a bad year here and there, but overall, this is basically an 8-4 program in my eyes. Getting this win, I think, basically cures that. Now, could they still go 8-4? Sure. Do I think they will? Probably not. I think they'll probably get to 9-3, maybe even 10-2. Maybe they just run the table and went out. But I think this really cemented themselves as hey, you know what? We can actually make it to a Big 12 title. We can win a Big 12 championship. And if we keep things rolling, we're going to be playing in New Year's Six game. And that's kind of what they put on tape, at least this weekend. Now, there's a long way to go. The Big 12 is topsy-turvy. But in this game, I was just so impressed. I mean, Will Howard, I don't know that there's much else to say here. 21 of 37, 296 yards, 4 touchdowns. This has been a weird year in the Big 12 because we've seen so much growth from quarterbacks that we thought we knew a lot about, right? So Max Duggan, where did this come from? Will Howard, a guy that we've seen play for 2 years due to injuries and things alike, and he just has simply been fantastic in these 2 games. I mean, at TCU, that's an incredibly tough spot to be thrown into. He played really well. And then this game, he was terrific. And I know I heard on the broadcast, and I kind of loved the idea of this, but essentially when Kansas State recruited Adrian Martinez, they told Will Howard, hey, man, we want you to be our quarterback of the future, but just not this year. And so their plan is to redshirt him. He's played in 2 games, so he still has 2 more to work with to keep his red shirt. And then after this year, he'll have 2 years to play. I mean, based on what we've seen, that's going to be a heck of 2 years for Kansas State football. Because this guy's shown incredible growth. He looks very comfortable in this new scheme that Colin Klein has brought in. And yeah, that was just fantastic. They ran the ball really well. Deuce Vaughn was terrific. Their running game is legit. We've seen that all year. It's more legit with Adrian Martinez, but on the flip side, their passing game looks more legit with Will Howard in there. So it's kind of a give and take type situation, but very impressed. They were able to score touchdowns with relative ease. They also had some plays that they missed on. I know there was an early one in which they had to punt, I believe, and Will was kind of rolling out of the pocket, and he had Malik Knowles wide open in the end zone for a 50-yard touchdown, and he missed him, and that's fine. That happens. But I'm just saying this game was not close. The 48-0 was very indicative of how this game played out and how much better Kansas State was on the day. Oklahoma State, I know Mike Gundy talked about this in his post-game press conference, talked about how he went with this approach of we're going to sit guys out during practice and we're going to allow them to get healthy because we're worried about our depth, and that kind of backfired on them. Now, I don't think it would have mattered if they had practice every day, but I do think it was nice of him to recognize hey, I can't do that ever again. And this is not the NFL where guys can just take days off and then we're just going to assume that they're going to be able to play at 100% on Saturdays. And so I think Gundy recognized that. That will get cleaned up, and they're going to be better. They're absolutely going to be better than what they showed on this day. The one thing I will say about Oklahoma State that I do think is something I'm going to talk about in future weeks with the Big 12 is this idea of consistency and this idea of, how many big-time games you play in a row matters. And for Oklahoma State, they had their bye week after their week 3 win over Arkansas Pine Bluff. Then their schedule has been at Baylor, Texas Tech, in which Tech ran 100 plays on them, at TCU, Texas, and then they had to go to Manhattan. So Manhattan was their last game of this string of just really, really tough games all in a row. And they showed up in this Kansas State one and laid an egg. And that's going to happen. And honestly, to go through that stretch 3-2 with a very, very competitive loss to TCU in double overtime, they're a pretty good team, right? Like I know they lost 48-0. They're still a pretty good team, and their schedule lays out fantastically. They have at Kansas, Iowa State, at Oklahoma, West Virginia. I mean, they could easily go 10-2. And in my eyes, if they go 10-2, they're probably going to be in the Big 12 championship game. Now, Kansas State has some say in that now because they have the tiebreak. But on the flip side, this could end up being a situation where there's a three-way tie. I mean, you got teams like Texas and Baylor kind of lurking, in which they could end with 2 losses if they're able to win out. So just something to keep an eye on as we kind of move forward in this conference landscape. But TCU 5-0. So let's kind of talk about the Big 12 big picture, right? TCU is 5-0. They have games against Texas Tech this weekend in which they're a 10-point favorite. At Texas, at Baylor, Iowa State. It's tough for me to see them losing more than twice. And if they're 10-2, there's a very high chance that they're going to be in the Big 12 championship game, especially because they already beat Kansas State and Oklahoma State. The only caveat to that would be if they lose to Baylor and Texas and one of those teams wins out, maybe something just crazy could happen as far as tiebreak scenarios go. Kansas State, 4-1, right? They got Texas this weekend, at Baylor, at West Virginia, and then Kansas. I think they're going to lose one of the next 2 to Texas and Baylor because it goes back to my whole theory of that consistency of playing really good teams. That kind of is about to hit Kansas State. So the question is, which one do they lose to? That's going to be very interesting. Now, they could lose both, but my guess is they're going to lose one of them. And it's going to be interesting. I would probably say the Baylor one is probably more likely. The at West Virginia game for them is a little scary, and then they'll beat Kansas at the end of the year. Oklahoma State, I mentioned their schedule already. If I had to project it right now, I don't think they're going to lose again. The schedule is really easy. I know the Big 12 is crazy, so maybe they get caught one more time. But at worst, they're only going to have 3 losses. Texas and Baylor are the 2 that have a crazy schedule, but a lot of opportunity to move up in the standings, right? Both of them only have 2 losses, and both of them still get to play Kansas State and TCU and each other on their schedule. That's pretty insane for these guys. Texas at Kansas State this weekend, then they got TCU at Kansas, and then Baylor. Baylor, on the other hand, at Oklahoma this weekend, then Kansas State and TCU at home, and then at Texas. So a lot of interesting things still to come in this conference, a lot still up in the air, and a lot of teams that are, with 2 losses, that are still contending. And as things progress, there's still a chance that a 3-loss team gets in, but the only way I see that happening is if Texas beats Kansas State this weekend. So very excited to see how this all plays out, but congratulations to the Kansas State Wildcats. You were the best team in the Big 12 this week. You were one of the best teams in the country this week, even with a backup quarterback. So very fascinated to see how things progress for those guys in Manhattan. I will have more previews, more recaps, and of course my best bets at the end of this week. But thanks for listening to Crystal Ball College Football.